This is St. Mel Hall in Cleveland. Voters have been piling in all day long to cast their ballot on Issue 1.
We've been telling you about this hotly debated topic in the past weeks leading up to today. Again, if passed, Issue 1 would change the way we amend Ohio's Constitution, meaning how we make changes to it.
Including the simple majority vote that's been in place for more than 100 years now. Issue 1 would raise the threshold to 60% instead, making it more difficult to change.
Our legal analyst Stephanie Haney joins us now. So Stephanie, can you start by just telling us how Ohio compares to other states when it comes to getting constitutional amendments onto the ballot and changed, of course?
Sure, because that is the first part of what Issue 1 would do. So 17 states allow citizens to get constitutional amendments on the ballot, and every state requires signatures from voters to do it. Now, most states tie the number of signatures to the number of people who voted in the last election for governor. That is the same as Ohio. Now, in terms of comparing, Arizona and Oklahoma require the most signatures to get an amendment on the ballot. They require 15% of the voters from the last governor's election to sign those petitions. The lowest number is in Massachusetts, where petitions to get amendments on the ballot require 3% of the voters from the last governor's election. Now, just over half of these 17 states we're talking about here dictate where those signatures have to come from within the state. For example, Colorado requires signatures from 2% of all registered voters, so different than the governor voters requirement there, and that's in every state Senate district to get a constitutional amendment on the ballot. Now, right now, Ohio goes by county and requires signatures from 5% of the voters from the last governor's election in 44 of our 88 counties. Now, if Issue 1 passes, that goes up to 5% of those voters in all 88 counties, Isabel and Laura.
Okay, Steph, so where does Ohio stand in terms of passing an amendment once it actually makes it onto the ballot?
Okay, this is where we're talking about the distinction between a simple majority and the supermajority there. So in 38 states, it takes a simple majority, 50% plus one, to get a state constitutional amendment passed. That's where Ohio stands right now and has since 1912. Now, in 11 states, it takes a supermajority or some other special requirement. Now, a supermajority is anything more than a simple majority. So 50% plus 2 is a supermajority, so is 60%, and so on. In Colorado, it takes 55% of the vote. In Wyoming and Minnesota, it takes a majority of all votes cast in the election. So you might wonder, what does that mean? Well, that means if you leave your vote blank for a constitutional amendment in those states, that equals a no vote. Now, things get very complicated in Illinois, so we'll stick with the basics here. In general, it takes a 60% vote on the amendment to pass it in most cases. Only 2 states always require 60% or more, which is where Ohio would fall if Issue 1 passes. Amendments require a 60% vote in Florida and a 66.67% vote in New Hampshire, or more plainly, a 2/3 vote. Now, Nevada is a really special case where an amendment has to get a majority vote in 2 back-to-back elections to get passed.
So you talk about these other states. Have other states tried to pass something like this recently as Ohio?
There's been a couple times. There's been 5 times actually in recent years where this has happened, and it hasn't gone well for the issues in those cases. 5 other attempts to raise the threshold for passing future ballot issues in general since 2017. Now, not all of those dealt with constitutional amendments. So the most on-point comparisons come from South Dakota and Arkansas. Both of those attempts failed. South Dakota Amendment X would have raised the threshold for constitutional amendments, and Arkansas's Issue 2 would have raised the threshold for constitutional amendments and also citizen-initiated statutes. So that's where those stand in terms of those comparisons. And Laura and Isabel, we've been tracking voter turnout all day long, so we can tell you in Cuyahoga County so far, we've seen voter turnout at about 28% so far.
So far, and there is still time.
Sure, yes, those polls are open for several more hours.
You have done a tremendous job breaking this down because it can be very confusing.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
So we thank you so much for that. Appreciate you.
I hope it's been helpful.
It has been
helpful, certainly.
And we're actually not done talking about Issue 1 either. We'll have more live coverage coming up at 5 and 6 with a live report from our special contributor, Mark Namick, at 11 o'clock. You can also head to WKYC.com for more information on Issue 1.